everyone, it's me, Crafty Witch. I thought I would do a book review on a book that I picked up at a local used bookstore here in town. They have a very tiny, itty bitty paranormal, occult, witchy section that only had like maybe 5 books, if that, and I'm being generous, and this was one of them. So now they're down to like maybe 4 books. But anyhow, I picked up this book. I had never heard of this author before. Um, and I thought, oh, interesting. Okay, it was published in 1989. Okay, let's give it a go. I don't particularly buy Wiccan books. I used to, because back in the late 80s, early 90s, and even into the 2000s, it was the market was so saturated with everything Wicca, and everything was like all things Wicca, and it was difficult to find anything that was really more like based on paganism, shamanism, witchcraft, traditional witchcraft. And when I say traditional, I don't mean just British witchcraft, whether it was traditional Nordic witchcraft, traditional German witchcraft, traditional Irish witchcraft, traditional Italian witchcraft, whatever that is, for folks. There wasn't a whole lot of that. And a lot of people back in the day, it just seemed to be like, and I am guilty of this too. I used to use the terms interchangeably because to me, on some aspects, it was kind of like, yeah, yeah. But then, even back then, to me, in my mind, I always pictured 3 generations when it came to witchcraft, Wicca, and shamanism. To me, shamanism was like the grandparent, witchcraft was the child, and Wicca was the grandchild. That's how, in my head, kind of like how I see the progression of it. You know what I mean? To me, witchcraft is definitely much older than Wicca. Shamanism is much older than witchcraft, but they're all kind of connected still. I don't think that it's completely separated from each other. I do think that, it's kind of like they got the same DNA, but they're their own generation, they're their own belief system, they are their own way of being and doing and operating in the world. You are not the same as your grandmother. You've got some genetic ties to your grandmother, but you are not your grandmother, and you are not your mom or your dad either. And Wicca is not, um, strictly the parent witchcraft or of shamanism, but there's genetic links throughout the whole thing. You know what I'm saying? I don't know. Probably not explaining that very well. But anyway, I digress. Getting back to this book. So it's Country Wicca, A Journal of the Old Religion, and it's written by, under a pseudonym, Rhiannon Ryall. Maybe I'm saying that wrong. I don't know. And so this lady, or whoever this author is, this person has put forth that this is what she was taught in the 1940s. She lived in the Devon and Somerset areas of England, and so this was her experience, what she was taught, what she was raised with, and this is what she's presenting. Now, this copy that I have was published in 1989, and apparently I think this is the first printing. There's other people that said that they have a first printing, but theirs was published in 1993 or 1991, which makes no sense to me because I've got a copy from 1989. I don't know if that will show up there. And I believe this is the first printing because, if it wasn't, they would have said, second printing, 10th printing, whatever. She goes on in here to kind of introduce her way of her teachings, what have you, as what she was taught in the 1940s, and it was long before she had even heard of Gerald Gardner or Alex Saunders, and this is what she was taught. And there's some similarities, and there's a few differences, of course, between the systems. This is just her own system. She was saying that there really was no name for it. It was just like what folks did back then. So some of the information was interesting. However, keep in mind when you read this, there is no bibliography, for one thing, at the back. There's none. And it's literally like maybe reading somebody's journal. You can't really verify anything that she talks about in here. However, you know, she does talk, and even like, I think the publisher wrote in here about it being like, you know, traditional witchcraft, blah, blah, blah. I would not say this was traditional witchcraft. It's definitely Wicca, which is what the title does talk about. However, you know, she goes on, you know, saying that, you know, this was long before Gardner, this was long before Saunders, this was way before she's even heard of anybody bringing like Wicca to the mainstream. And yet she uses so much of what they brought, you know, just the terms, the Lord and the Lady, and like, you know, she talks about drawing down the moon. Not saying that that hadn't happened in history, historically, you know, in various cultures and all that kind of stuff. But it feels as though she's passing off something that maybe she's created, but saying that it had no links, no ties to Gardner or them. And I think that's where she got some of the inspiration from. However, that's just my opinion. I could be totally wrong. Maybe this person really was taught all this before Gardner had even brought it to the public. Maybe it could very well be. But it does not feel authentic. And I get when people, like, if they write a book and they're like, hey, this is what I was taught, this is what I was raised with. Because, like, hey, I totally get that. Like, even my own system of practice, it's very different. And, like, some of it, a good chunk of it was, yeah, based on what I was taught. But then I've also incorporated things I've learned along the way. And I cannot present it as saying, like, this is traditional such and such. And no, this is just my way of doing things. And like, how do you prove that to people? Especially, she even, you know, even the title says a journal of. So it's literally like kind of like reading somebody's journal. They put their thoughts together, they put it in order, and they just present it like, hey, this is what it is. It's a very quick read. If you want to read it, I'm not going to say don't bother. You might find it, you know, useful just to have in your library, just as an addition from, you know, something from the 80s. And this is like one person's contribution to specifically Wicca, obviously. Do I consider this to be traditional witchcraft from like the Devon, Somerset areas? I don't think so. You might find some things in here that are useful or informative. She does have a few recipes in the back, not a whole lot. Things about like how to make mead and blackberry wine and dandelion wine and like, you know, different cold remedies, things for asthma, that sort of thing. She talks tiny little bit on divination with regards like to tarot cards and stuff. She mentioned some herbs. I don't feel it's really relevant. But somebody might really enjoy this. You know, she includes some stuff about the crossroad customs from that area where she had been. She had mentioned she lived near a crossroads, and it was called Copplestone, and like she mentioned certain places over there. So I mean, it can very well be authentic. But if you've read like Gemma Gary and then you try to read this thinking, no, it's not the same, and it's not, you know, it's not the same. It's very Wicca based, and but even like the terms, the Lord and the Lady, and maybe, you know, maybe this is completely, everything she wrote in here is her complete truth, as she knows it, and maybe I am being overly critical. I would not use this as a, you know, really good source to base your practice on, but if you want to get an idea of what was available back in the 80s to folks, then maybe this might be, just, my hair is kind of biting me, this might give you an insight on, you know, what folks had to work with at the time. And it's not like now there's like so much access. Now we've got the internet, of course, we've got Google, and now we've got a plethora of information at our fingertips, and like all kinds of books, and whether it's on Wicca, whether it's on more traditional forms of witchcraft or magic, folklore, all that kind of stuff. Now we have like so much access to like so much more information, which is incredible. But at that point in time, the access you had was extremely limited. We didn't have the internet. You couldn't order books online, have them delivered by Amazon or anything like that. Like, it just, you had only access to whatever you're able to come across, and it was quite limiting. So keep that in mind when you do read this. Like, and I try to be very objective, and trying to remember that, as well as like, how do you, if you went to somebody else's home and you rummaged through their diary, how do you prove that what they wrote in their diary is true? You can't. I mean, that's that person's expression. That is what they are presenting to the world. However, some of the comments she makes in here, I feel that she's borrowed from Gardner and other folks that brought Wicca to the mainstream, but maybe she didn't. Maybe what she's saying in here is absolutely 100% true, and maybe I'm being an arschluck for even mentioning it. But anyway, that's kind of my take on it. It's going into my library. I'll probably stay there just as a, you know, just another voice that was, you know, contributing to the craft back in the 80s. So that's my view on that. Read it if you want. Take it with a grain of salt. You might find some useful information. Maybe you might find some inspiration in the book. For myself, not really. Maybe I'll try to make some of the wines. I don't know. We'll see. So anyway, that's my review on West Country Wicca, A Journal of the Old Religion. Please do not read this and try to compare it to Gemma Gary. I felt when I was going to be reading this that there might be some connection there. Not really. And if you read Gemma Gary and you try to read this, you're going to end up being disappointed, I think. But maybe not. Maybe you'll think it's really quaint and adorable, and you might really like it. I wasn't one of them. That's all. But that's just me. Take care. Bye.